Why is drunkenness considered sinful? We could broaden the question more generally to ask, what makes anything sinful? Why are certain behaviors off limits? Some Christians and non-Christians alike have a particular conception of God as a person, much like you or I, except perhaps more powerful, who randomly decides to create the world and then places human beings into that world and then feels compelled to come up with certain rules or restrictions for those human beings. And so God imposes or issues certain commands or laws without any particular order or reason that certain behaviors are off limits. And then Christians come to discover those commands in the Bible and are obligated simply to abide by them. And yet, drunkenness is not only considered sinful within the Christian tradition. There are other religious and philosophical traditions that also would say that drunkenness ought to be avoided, such as in the Buddhist tradition, for example. According to Buddhist teaching, intoxication ought to be avoided for the dangers that result from it, including susceptibility to illness, the loss of wealth, and increased quarreling. The book of Proverbs similarly says that strong drink is a brawler, and that the drunkard will be led into poverty. How is it that non-Christians such as Buddhists can recognize that drunkenness ought to be avoided? It's because God does not create the world arbitrarily and issue arbitrary commands out of the sheer ability of his will. Rather, God creates the world according to his own eternal divine wisdom, and he creates human beings in his own image and endows us with the gift of reason such that we can observe the created order around us, and we can observe our own inner human constitution as it relates to the world around us, and we can come to know and discern what is good and bad for us. When people get drunk, their inhibitions are lowered and their confidence goes up in such a way that they say things that they can't take back, they do things that cannot be undone, and they become less aware of danger and they lose their sense of self-control. Marriages are broken, trust is lost, the vulnerable are abused and exploited, and lives are literally destroyed, and these choices impact generations to come. Thomas Aquinas explains it succinctly when he says that drunkenness is sinful because it compromises the use of our reason simply for the sake of pleasure. And of course, much more could be said about the effects of alcohol on our immune system, on our hormones, and on our organs. Sin, therefore, is not merely to be understood as just a violation of biblical rules or biblical commands. Rather, sin is to be understood as that which is contrary to reason. Many of us recognize this when we look back at our misbehavior and our mistakes and we confess, I was so stupid. God is not an arbitrary, clueless dictator. God is eternal wisdom, so his laws are not without reason.